As the previous panel as well, I'll introduce myself as saying that I'm not Amanda Zamora. Unfortunately, Amanda's not feeling well. She's here, but unfortunately not able to join us on the panel. So I'll try to keep the conversation going as a pseudo moderator, but I think we're all adults and we can figure things out and just move forward and allow each of us to do our own introduction. First one up is going to be Marc Lavallee from the New York Times.
Should I go up first?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. You want me to just go into it?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. I'm gonna go that way. I'm Marc. Very informal. So I'm Marc Lavallee. I'm the editor of interactive news at the New York Times. One of the areas that we focus on is the sort of like every step of the process for a lot of our crowdsourcing projects, from putting callouts out there, working with our social team to get those in front of people, particularly who are not regular Times readers, and then working through the sort of what material we want to present, and then working on the presentations of those with desks to sort of add that element to our news report. So we'll be talking mostly about tools today, but I wanted to start at the end and show sort of the output of the process and quickly walk through 3 examples that sort of show how do I get out of escape? There we go. To show how I can't use a computer. To show 3 examples sort of like small, medium, and large size projects and sort of how we approach each of these. There's an opportunity, I think, for many news organizations to fold crowdsourcing and engagement into basically the everyday news report. It doesn't have to be some big, special, splashy thing. And so increasingly, we've been trying to do this, particularly around news events where we want to, in addition to reporting out the story itself, sort of show what our readers are saying about it. So in this case, this is very simple. We did a basic call out to get readers' reactions to this sort of very specific news event in Chicago, in the middle of the U.S. And with the hundreds of responses we got, instead of just putting them all online as is and having readers sift through it, we did some amount of work to sort of synthesize and group those together to sort of put a layer of analysis on it. So this is super basic. This is more or less a standard article. Where we've used the sort of crowdsourcing and ingestion tools that we had to be able to collect these things. A key element for us in this is making sure that the sort of across all of these, including these small things, that the barriers to entry are really low, that you don't have to be a registered user of our website or something like that in order to participate, that you can find it easily and sort of have this one-time interaction with us. So we try to do this at a minimum now on a weekly basis of picking at least one story that we think would benefit from this kind of sort of collected and considered reader response. Sort of working up the levels of complexity a little bit. A couple of years ago was the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington, which is a huge moment in the Civil Rights Act in the United States. And so what we wanted to do was sort of capture a narrative of the experience of people who attended the rally, and sort of be able to understand what it was like from a first person account. And so in sort of collecting the material, this is one of these situations where you need to see what you get before really deciding on the exact format for presentation. So this really started out as a sort of more traditional UGC project, where we were working just with the material provided. And what we learned in starting to go through it was that it was so meaningful and powerful that we wanted to really sort of raise the bar in the way that we presented it. And so in that, we put some extra effort into taking these different stories and finding sort of representative examples that essentially became more of an oral history that walked you through chronologically the experience of getting on a bus, going to DC, really being able to reflect on that later on, and sort of have those memories be things that you pass down to the next generations. What you see here is a combination of sort of material that was provided as is, in terms of like sort of essays that people wrote. There's some that were sort of more like as told to sort of interviews. And then a combination of professional photography where we sent photographers out to shoot these folks, and then original material as well. And so, you know, I think an important part for us in this was not having the New York Times piece written by New York Times reporters and New York Times photographers, and then the UGC thing over here, almost as a sort of like second-class citizen, that we tried to sort of weave all of this together into a single experience. And then finally, this is sort of probably on the largest end of what we'll do around an individual crowdsourcing project. The opinion section last year wanted to really put individual stories of the transgender community front and center. And so this is something where you know, the reporter working on this did a lot of lead work in building an initial community offline of people who he got these stories from, and really sort of worked with them to understand what kind of questions we should ask, what kind of material we should be soliciting, and so on. And in doing that, really, I won't play any of these videos, but they're all incredibly powerful. Really latched on to the fact that, you know, from his perspective, he wanted to be able to sort of show these stories in people's, not just in their own words, but in their own voices, and in their own presentation as well. So we put this presentation together as a way of being able to highlight each of the entries that we ended up publishing in a way sort of within this mixed media format where we can really work with the best combination of material we got. Sometimes that's just a photo, sometimes that's a video. Other times we'll, let's see if any of these load. Well, you know, if someone didn't submit any visual, but the essay was really powerful, we wanted to have a way of being able to present that as well. And so this was another situation where initially we were skeptical that a reader would want to sort of watch a lot of these videos and really dive into a lot of these stories. Normally the other two examples that I showed in particular are really trying to sort of distill this to make it a sort of faster experience. But when we started to get the material in, it was obvious that this is the kind of thing that you can really sort of spend a lot of time with. And every story in here sort of continues to add another dimension to sort of the ongoing theme. And so I don't remember the exact numbers, but suffice it to say that sort of the amount of time people spent on this page was way higher than sort of the average article or story on the New York Times. And, you know, at the end of the day, looking at the output of this, not surprisingly. So those are really three examples of how we sort of like use pretty much the same tools on the back end, but in sort of really thinking about each individual project, try to figure out if it's really sort of more of a small thing, a medium-sized thing, or a large thing. I'll put this back here. Right? Great. I did that wrong. Sorry, you'll fix it. I'm not good with computers. Thank you.
Yeah, right. Thanks, Mark. So I'm Andrew DeVigal. I'm officially within the festival here, representing the University of Oregon School of Journalism and Communication, where I'm the chair of Journalism Innovation and Civic Engagement at a center called the Agora Journalism Center. But because this is an opportunity to talk about tools and some of the crafts that we put together, I'm going to put in slightly my other hat, my night hat, if you will, in terms of some tools that we were developing with the organization I co-founded called the Fourth Act. And I want to talk briefly about a tool called Harvest, and it's a tool that we've generated to truly help visualize the knowledge that we harvest from an engaged community. We built this with the hope that we are actually respecting the expertise and the knowledge that we intentionally bring together to look at social issues within a community. And this is somewhat how it works. So we can address 3 questions with this mobile web tool. So what it is it's a mobile web tool. So it's not an app that you have to download. So the entry point is frictionless. You can just simply point your mobile browser to harv.is, which I'm not asking you to do today to save some time, but it's a really quick way to bring in people together with looking at the same issues through a convening. So purposefully, we designed the mobile web app for documentary films, looking at, again, social issues. It can also be used for gatherings, conferences, and such as this. If we were to use Harvest, for example, to really gain the knowledge that you can provide in the conversation that we want to facilitate, we would use it at that point. There's 3 opportunities to engage with this app. A, there's an opportunity to identify who's in the room. So you can quickly take a survey of your role within the community. So you can see here, you're looking, you press an advocate within your community. And then there's the second tab, which is primarily the primary tab that you have when you first use this mobile web app. This is an opportunity for us to understand what part of the story most impacted you individually and personally that you can connect with. So there's only 2 things that we ask of you at this point. Swipe up on your mobile device whenever you feel motivated to act, or swipe down whenever you feel disempowered, right? Or you feel powerless because of the issue that's presented on screen. And then finally, we pause the film for 3 minutes, or we make an intentional prompt for 3 minutes where we ask of the community members their expertise, their knowledge, what solutions they can provide to the issue being presented on screen. So after the film, or again, after the presentation, we can then visualize that engagement across the screen. You can see here that we can roll through the timeline. You can see what part of the film was actually within that screen. You can see the peaks and valleys of engagement. You can look at the pull quotes that was presented on the screen. And we can also visualize the comments as well as the polls that we take throughout that engagement. We can also sort that engagement graphic by the role that they identified with within the community. So if we look at the administrators, we can see how the engagement tool changes. We can look at educators, we can look at parents. So we use the film as our launch partner on a film focusing on Black male achievement gap called American Promise. That's why the customization is really built for that tool. So a second project that we used this tool with was looking at and we partnered with a photojournalist by the name of Tim Mitsui, looking at his multi-platform initiative called Leaving the Life. And his film is really looking at the domestic minor sex trafficking that's happening in the Pacific Northwest region in the United States. And what we did there was we showed very discrete chapters, and we actually facilitated a conversation with stakeholders of this issue. So law enforcement, former pimps, service providers, and also government agencies to really look at the issue and purposefully have a convening to address the issue of domestic minor sex trafficking. So one of the insights that I want to share and some of the power that Harvest can provide is looking at the engagement graphic. So I pulled out a portion of the engagement graphic based on the roles that they provided. On your left side is the engagement of a particular scene based on the law enforcement, the detective, and you can see that there was very minimal engagement. But yet, in the same scene, if you look at the service providers, there was an enormous engagement there. In other words, there was a solution that they wanted to provide. We dug deep into that particular part of the film. We recognized that what had happened was, it was a scene where 4 law enforcement men were towering over this young victim of domestic sex trafficking, as, you know, and they looked at it as more of perpetrators as opposed to offering opportunities for solutions as them being victims rather than perpetrators. So this was an entry point for that conversation at the end of the screening of a facilitated convening to be able to address that issue directly. You know, for a lot of situations that we've shared, a lot of people say that this tool allows them to quickly get to the issue faster so they can look at solutions within the hour of convening. So you can also see how we can also present this at a town hall meeting or at a panel discussion. And one of the things that we did for this particular convening was we used a new tool that we called Harvest Pond, where we could visualize how people were swiping up and swiping down in real time. So this is an example of any circles that you see in purple purple was a swipe down, and anything you see in a circle in green is a swipe up. So then now you can get a pulse of the community and of the audience as the film is being rolled. So I just wanted to introduce that as a potential solution, and also just thinking differently of how we want to engage and, again, harness the knowledge of the community. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Andrew Haeg. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called GroundSource, which is a community engagement platform that newsrooms use to directly engage their audiences and their communities through SMS and now through mobile messaging. How many people here use WhatsApp? Yeah, about half, more. I've just tweeted out under my name, you can add a WhatsApp number as a contact and text the word engage into it, and you'll see the back and forth on the source's end. You can do that now or you can do it later. But the idea is that increasingly news is a conversation, and that we need to have tools that allow news organizations to scale up not only distribution of content, but listening and building relationships as well. So I've been at it for about 3 years, and before this I built a platform called the Public Insight Network, which I spent about 10 years developing and spreading to newsrooms around the US mostly, and saw a need for a platform that was obviously mobile, because that's where the world was heading, but also that lowered the barrier to engagement so that newsrooms could be a lot more inclusive and expansive in their outreach and in their storytelling and in their engagement.
Sorry to pause you, Andrew. Maybe we can put the slide. I don't think the slide is up on the main screen. So
Oh, okay.
there we go.
So the way it works is that you have a workspace where you can create the back and forth. You can automate a back and forth with your sources by asking questions and then sharing messages. And then, like with what you'll see on Twitter, you can text in a keyword to an SMS number, to a WhatsApp number, to a Telegram number, and in the future, WeChat, Line, whatever. And it'll automate a back and forth. And it's kind of like a structured interview or a survey. And as people respond to that, they get another question sent to their phone. And then as that information comes in, it comes into a central feed that or producers and journalists can be monitoring to see people who are saying things in the community. And then they can also reply to that individual directly from the feed and have a back and forth conversation. So someone shares a photo from an event, and then you can privately message that person saying, tell me more about where you took that photo, who's in it, that kind of thing. And that over time, as you build up contacts, you build up a base of sources who you're communicating with. And then you can target messaging back out to them based on any number of criteria, whether that's demographics, geography, what they've said in the past. So in this way, it's creating a two-way ongoing relationship with sources that you can scale throughout your newsroom. So once you've got a phone number set up, just like with social media, building that community initially is the hard thing to do. So these are some of the tactics. ProPublica is using this to report on rent control abuse in New York City. So they're putting this phone number up on signs and online on social media to get people to respond. But it's also the kind of thing you could put on a flyer and stick inside an elevator inside of an apartment building and get people to text you from within that space. So the phone number, I think people are very used to seeing phone numbers pasted up on flyers around the community. If you have a community you want to reach, this is one tactic for doing that. You can go out, put the flyers up, work with community organizations. We do this now in the community I'm living in, which is a smaller town in Georgia in the States. So we put some of these signs up in the community. And the idea is not just to get people to respond, but to put these in places where people whose voices aren't being heard will have a chance to see this and participate. And you'll see that the barrier to entry is incredibly low. There's no sense of like, I need to be a citizen journalist, or I need to be even that articulate. I just need to be able to raise my hand through a text message and say, I'm experiencing something. And that's incredibly powerful. And just that simple act of texting in can lead to some incredible impact. So this is what a back and forth might look like over SMS. So recently we asked about gun control in the US, and as you probably know, it's a very touchy subject. And if you open up comments on a story on gun control in a newspaper, you're going to get the predictable people circling their wagons and trying to win the argument for or against gun control. And what we wanted wasn't the argument. We didn't want people bloviating about their opinions about gun control or for or against it. We wanted experiences. So you'll see the way we framed question number 3 is that we made it about their experience. So what we got back wasn't a bunch of people opining. It was actually people talking about their experience. So it's a little hard to read from, especially back in the room. But we've heard back from people who saw people die at their feet due to gunshot wounds, people who've been in gangs. But then they talked about their opinion about gun control, whether or not it should be stricter, but they did so from within the context of experience. So they invested themselves by sharing a bit of their story and then shared their opinion, and it made their opinion that much more, gave it that much more weight. And we heard from hunters, people who grew up in hunting families who had guns passed down through generations through their family, but who were for stricter gun control laws. Now that's a very nuanced, surprising point of view that I don't think we would have gotten in the comments section, because this person might have been inclined to support people who were opposed to gun control because he's a gun owner, comes from a family of gun owners. So in this way, by using this kind of very intimate, one-to-one conversational form of engagement, you can get people talking about their experience and not just about their opinion. And what we've heard back from newsrooms using it so far is that what they're getting back through GroundSource is vastly better in quality and sometimes in quantity than what they get in the comments section of the newspaper or of their news site. And that's encouraging. And it's led to stories. So one woman texted in, it was a very short, let me see if I can find it here. No, it's not there. All she did was text in a few sentences saying, my son was killed walking to the gas station a little more than a year ago, and now I'm teaching my 5 kids how to use guns. So a gun owner, but probably not a member of the National Rifle Association, and certainly not a gun enthusiast, but someone who is buying guns in order to protect herself and her family. And she was able to raise her hand and tell her story because we gave her a very simple way into the conversation. And it led to this story on statewide radio. And now the reporter who did this story has gotten in touch with the guy who shot her son, and he's going to do a story. The second half of the story is going to be from prison, talking to the person who shot her son. And it all started with a 10-word text message into a phone number. So it's the value of opening up to your community and giving them channels into the conversation is what GroundSource is all about. And I really think this is the main value that we're trying to bring is to create that sense of a community talking to itself, a nation talking to itself, so that the journalism can be more reflective of the communities it's serving and more inclusive and expansive. Thanks.
Hello, I'm Jacopo Ottaviani, Italian data journalist, and I'm here to show you and describe you the project I worked on with a couple of other European data journalists about South European migration in Europe. It is a crowdsourced project, so we wanted to collect data about South European young people who decided to leave their own countries, especially Italy, Spain, Greece, and Portugal. And from this project that was co-published by a number of European media outlets in multiple languages, we basically created a community of South European migrants who started to share opinions on Facebook and started a relationship with us, actually, because we also individually interviewed them after we collected the data about their stories. The project is called Generation E. And we have a website, generatione.eu, that can be seen online. Let me take Safari. I'll open it very quickly here. This is the platform we started as a group of journalists. It's there. Okay. You can go there and see both the methodology we used and the results of the project. Basically, we use this website as a platform to keep all the results of our research together, but all the results and all the stories we collected, some specific stories were published on newspapers in different languages in Europe. What we did, we simply set up a Google form that asked structured questions to South European migrants in different languages. I show you the English version. We ask them where are they from, where did they move to, or if they are graduated or not, if they are thinking to come back to their own countries at some point in their lives. These are all questions that are still open, and researchers in Europe don't know how to answer to these questions. Why? Because we have the Schengen Agreement. So people who move from, for example, Greece to England or from Italy to France don't have to apply for a visa. This means that all this data is not really clear to the, for example, institutes of statistics in Europe. So we wanted to shed a light on this data, and we collected it directly from the readers of the newspapers that participated to our cross-borders investigation. We asked questions that are relevant for research, and we also asked them to share their own stories on this free text field here. And by the end of the investigation, by the end of the project, we collected more than 2,000 stories. Actually, at the final figure is, I think, 2,500 stories, which is great. You can imagine the sensation we had when we opened our Excel file after we launched the crowdsourcing form, to have so many life stories into a table, and we felt kind of overwhelmed. We were 4 people speaking 4 languages, and we decided to go through all these stories and to select a number of them to like focus on these interesting stories that also break some stereotypes around South European migration. The results are published on a number of newspapers. I'll quickly open one that was published on Collective in Germany. We wanted to focus on, you all probably know that Germany is attracting a lot of migrants at the moment because the economy is going very well. We wanted to fight some populism around the phenomenon of South European migrants going to Germany. And that's why we published on a German media outlet 8 stories. We published them in German and English. 8 stories that we found interesting and to be like against the common narrative of the South European migrants in Germany. People, for example, creating jobs. So through crowdsourcing, we could collect a number of stories that would be very complicated to find if you just go around and talk to people. Like if you have like 2,500 stories, you can find very interesting ones. And if you want, you can get in touch back with the people who participated to our survey and start a conversation with them and then focus on them. For example, as you can see here, we published 8 stories of people who are, in our opinion at least, bringing good consequences to Germany. For example, people starting companies and giving jobs to Germans, things that are not so often told in Germany. There is a huge potential in this kind of crowdsourced stories. I believe that something that is crucial is the feeling that you can touch when you try to access a certain community. So these people are all motivated to tell their stories because they all live very intensely this moment of their lives, and they felt, okay, I know that there are other people around, not only in my country, not only from my country and not only in the country I moved to, who are part of my same community. So they felt like, okay, I'll take part of this crowdsourcing campaign and I'll share my story. Some people took it very seriously and sent us very, very long stories. Some others sent very, very quick stories of their lives, some episodes. They shared episodes with us. So we were very happy with the results of this. It was really cheap in terms of technology because we used existing tools such as Google Form. This is a Google Form with a custom CSS so that we could adapt it to the newspaper's design. Basically, we embedded this crowdsourcing form, this form, into the newspaper's website in order to maximize the visibility of the form. We didn't ask the newspapers to outsource the crowdsourcing, but we embedded the form into their websites and we customized the design of the form. How did we, let me take keynote. How did we work together? As journalists, we used a tool called Trello. That's how we managed our work. And this tool is free, it's Trello.com. You can find it online. And we discussed everything because we were working from different countries. So we also needed to engage we all almost all of us were working as freelancers, doing other things, and we used Trello to coordinate and manage the project. So we were working in different time zones, in different languages. We spoke English, shared all the research we did onto this platform, and I would suggest you to have a look at it. So yeah, this is my quick description of Generation E. If you have any further questions, you can ask me later. Thank you.
So, before we open it up to the audience, I do have one question because of the consistency I think I observed during the presentations was the fact that, you know, regardless of the size of the organization, whether it's really small or, you know, it's a startup company or a large organization like the New York Times, I would love if each one of you can briefly share a story of your decision-making process, of the type of feature you would incorporate to be able to connect with your communities better, right? So, because, you know, regardless of the size, it seems that these are real resources that you would have to devote to achieve that goal of connecting with communities. So, Andrew?
I think the biggest choice we made early on was to build for SMS, which is technologically kind of low fidelity and a little funky to work with, and you don't get a lot of data out of it. You can't get geolocation. There's a lot of things you can't get with it, but it's also ubiquitous. It's the app that comes pre-installed on every single phone. So it was that trade-off that we struggled with initially is do we build for a technology that is so limited in some respects, but is so expansive in others? And so that was the foundation we built. And then thankfully, the world has headed in the direction that pretty much every messaging app is essentially an SMS clone. So the flow that we developed for SMS now works beautifully on every messaging app that's being released. And in fact, there's more powers being added to those that takes it beyond just a simple messaging back and forth. But I think, you know, there's a good Clay Shirky quote, and I need to quote Clay Shirky whenever I'm on a panel. It makes me sound smarter. Is that when communications technologies become boring, they become technologically boring, they become socially interesting. And I think that's always what I'm drawn to, is what's the technology that allows for the greatest possible reach and the widest possible opportunity to talk to people.
So I think for us at the New York Times, one of the ways that we have approached it, yes? Can you hear me? All right, sorry. One of the ways that we've approached it, you know, we have the individual stories and presentations that we put together, and then we have also grown our own sort of internal set of tools over the years to be able to handle all of these projects. And, you know, we, believe it or not, don't have limitless resources to throw at all of these things. And so we do have to be, judicious in how we make this stuff work. A pattern that works really well for us when we have, you know, in having developers who are also journalists in the newsroom, is that they can be working on a story, with folks on desks, and also be working on the tool or the platform at the same time. So, for instance, with the transgender series that I showed, we worked on that with Opinion, but we also built the video upload functionality into our tool, so we can now use that for every other project from here forward. So that capability is now just part of our sort of like our toolbox. And so that helps us, because we are structured that way, we don't have to necessarily predict all of the things we might want to do someday. We can usually sort of build those new features pretty quickly in the service of an individual story and use those opportunities to really sort of get it right.
I think a crucial decision we took was that we would co-publish the investigation in multiple languages, explaining the philosophy of the project before launching the crowdsourcing to the community we were targeting. So basically, we wanted the people to feel part of not a national project, not something related only to the people from their countries, but part of a bigger picture. South European migrants actually share problems, even if they come from different countries, such as Spain or Portugal. And we know that they tend to feel part of a community, so we explain them that the data we would collect has a sort of mission. So the project was a journalistic project with a mission of understanding this community, break stereotypes. So we leveraged on their needs somehow. And this brought us a lot of visibility because these expats or migrants, you choose how to call them. I would prefer migrants, but others, the E stands also for expats. All these people felt part of a common picture, and they started sharing the forms with their friends. They were very collaborative with us when we wanted to interview them. So I would suggest you, when you are planning to run a crowdsourcing campaign, not just to run it, but just try to create a process and to involve them and share with your target community your philosophy as journalists.
Super. Thank you. Any questions or comments, thoughts, add to the conversation? I think it's mic being passed around.
Yes, hi, thank you. I know some of you have been sitting on the panel since early this morning. I'm Nadia. I'll put on my hat of former vice president of the Community Media Forum Europe, which is an organization that does lobbying and advocacy work for community media in Europe. You might be familiar with community media being the third media sector alternative, not for profit. It's been around for more than 30 years, and a lot of the methods and strategies that community media has been using are now being adopted by other types of journalistic projects. And I think the level of engagement that projects like the one that Jacopo mentioned are really exceptional. What I'm concerned about is really the media literacy angle, because what I think community media traditionally has always done very well has been not only to involve the community and empowering them through ownership of the means of communication, but also by giving them media literacy skills and making them aware of what it means to communicate as an empowered individual, making them aware of the consequences of sharing also personal information about their lives, about sharing their opinions. And I'm sort of wondering how that comes in. I've heard from Jacopo a little bit about that they explained the consequences and so on. I just would like to hear your opinion on this. Thank you.
So we are, just by the nature of what we're doing, at least in the projects I've worked on with GroundSource in communities, dealing with people who've never been engaged as sources really before, unless there was, like I said earlier, a crime or a fire or something, and they were asked for their opinion on that. And initially we thought low barrier to entry into the conversation meant few words, like not very much explanation as to what the project was about, thinking the more we explained it, the more it would be off-putting. But then as we started to interview people out in the community about the project itself, we realized they needed a lot more transparency about what the project was about, because they see signs in their communities all the time that are very exploitative. And it typically, if you go into a community and you're doing survey work, they just assume you're going to take the information out of the community and they'll never benefit from it. So anything that like has the smell of someone coming in and extracting something from the community, leaving, they benefit from it. They have a nice polished report that they deliver down the road, but the community doesn't see any of the benefits of it. That educational piece of it and the transparency piece of it, we realized was really important. So now we're leading in all of our materials with a lot of explanation. I mean, it's in smaller text, so you have to approach the poster a little bit. That they're anonymous. I mean, we're going to know their phone number, but they'll be anonymous when we publish their comments online. That who's behind the project, what the intent of it is, what we hope to do with all the information, and how they benefit. That's part one. Part two is that the moment their response is published into some sort of feed, they automatically get a text message thanking them for their contribution and saying, now you can go see what other people are saying. So they go from, I'm taking a little survey, to I'm part of a community and now I'm not alone. So I think over time, as we go through more cycles of that media literacy piece is going to start to build up in these communities. But it's a sustained thing over time. We're not going to get it right the first time.
One thing I would add to that is an example. As much as Andrew often quotes Clay Sharkey on panels, I often never fail to mention my wife, Laura Laforti, and her project that she's doing in Portland, Oregon. And it's a project that she's focusing on a piece of Portland history that no one really talks about. It's about a story of what they call the Vanport floods, which was the second biggest city in Oregon after World War II, or during World War II, where they built these very temporary homes to support the shipbuilders. In any case, the story really talks about, after the war, there was a flood that essentially disseminated the entire community, where it kind of started the displacement of African American communities in Portland, and thus the continued history of racial tensions in the community. And what she's doing with the community is she's actually working with the community to tell that story. The survivors are now 70, 80 years old, and she's not doing it from a journalistic point of view, although she was a former journalist here in Italy years ago. But she's actually working with community members to actually empower them to tell their own story. So throughout that process, they are learning media literacy, but also there's also an expectation that the media that they create isn't going to be at this high level professional quality, but it is authentically the stories of the community, owned by the community, told by the community, created by the community. And to me, those are the kinds of journalism that I see in the future, of collaboration and of being able to tell the full story of a piece of history.
Right.
Sure.
I mean, I think from our perspective, one of the things that is an ongoing sort of job of ours is that there's, even within a single organization, there's no one-size-fits-all set of recommendations you can give people in creating these kind of participatory projects. So, from the three examples I walked through, the small, the medium, and the large, they each came with their own sort of set of expectations on the reporter, given sort of the increasing amount of sensitivity of the material, of how to work, with the call out, and then with the, with the sort of potential participants from that point forward. So, with the call-outs themselves, what we try to do is make sure that we're only asking for the amount of information necessary to basically decide if this person is sort of potentially worth following up with. We make a lot of the additional material optional if they want to provide, if they're comfortable with that, that they are allowed to, but that, we really just need to understand the bare minimum to sort of move on to the next phase, which is, for something like, dealing with stories about transgender people, something that is very much a human, like a reporter to the person interaction, where they're building that kind of relationship as well, and sort of treating that much more like in some ways, a sort of traditional reporting. And so I think that helps a good bit on the literacy end, at least for that single engagement. I think the bigger question for us is, who is, from a participation angle, and making sure that we're actually getting to the voices who would be turned off to the idea of submitting anything over the web at all. How are we opening up avenues for them to be able to participate as well, so that our coverage is not leaving them out, right? And I think part of how we try to do that is through other traditional reporting means of getting into these communities offline as well. But that, that doesn't necessarily give us a strong degree of confidence that we're hitting that at 100%. One last thing I'll say, because my panel obligation is to talk about the Coral Project, which I oversee from the New York Times end of things. This is a collaboration between us, the Washington Post, Mozilla Foundation, funded by the Knight Foundation. And I think a thing we're really just starting to work through in this phase of the project right now is, it's one thing for an individual news organization to have the tools and have the best practices inside their own organization and be able to sort of build those alongside the other existing journalistic standards. How do you start to have a conversation about that among different media organizations, where we're not being, as the Coral Project's, totally paternalistic in saying this is the way to do it, that sort of different organizations can figure it out on their own, but that we have some responsibility to make sure that when our technology is used in these various ways, that there's essentially some amount of like safety and privacy and security attached to that. And what are things that we can do as an industry to sort of make that clear from site to site? So any thoughts on that are very welcome, because that is top of mind for us right now.
Thanks. My name is Mukti Jane Campion. I make documentaries for BBC Radio 4. I'm very interested, particularly Andrew and Mark, issue of whether you're able to manage expectations once you start engaging with your audiences, given that you're perhaps at two ends of the spectrum in terms of resources that you can allocate. Once you unleash this idea of being in contact and drawing on your audiences for their stories, do you ever get a sort of backlash about why didn't you feature me, or why haven't you contacted me about what I've just shared with you? Is there an issue around resources?
So with GroundSource and then my previous project, Public Insight Network, which had a lot of the flavor of these kinds of things where we're doing more in-depth call-outs via surveys and that sort of thing, that was always the concern initially, is that we would ask for all these stories and get so many stories back, and that a journalist would take 2 as sources and put them in a story, and then the other 1,998 wouldn't appear anywhere. And we thought we would get more pushback, and not once have I ever gotten a comment from a source saying, why didn't you use me and what happened to mine? I think the main thing we worry about is closing the feedback loop. Just to say, and I think Mary Hamilton talked about this in the previous panel, just a very simple thank you back to the person closes that loop. And I think the more I've thought about this, I mean, the more people have asked me what motivates people to do this, and I'd be curious to hear what other people say. I think they want to be listened to. I think they want their story to get something off their chest and to have someone listen to it. And I think if you can just meet those basic conditions, then you're not going to have any pushback or any blowback from the community saying, why didn't you do this or that? Now, if it's more activists or advocates really pushing for change, and you've opened up a channel that they think is something they can use to make some change, and change doesn't happen, you could feel the heat from that, and that's happened a few times. But if you're honest about your intentions, that we're telling the story of the community and this is how we're doing it, and you give some simple feedback, I think you'll be fine.
Yeah, similarly, I'm not aware of an instance, and definitely not a pattern of people whose contributions are not used feeling like agitated about that to the point where they reach out. I think to Andrew's point, and I think we sort of were a little slow to do this at the outset, as there are a lot of upsides to that sort of build as you go approach that I mentioned. One of the downsides is, some of those sorts of like closing the feedback loop kinds of things aren't always done in time. So I think we learned, from that, particularly making sure that for a lot of the stuff that we do, that's coming from the reporter. Even if it's sort of being sent in a somewhat automated way, that it's their voice thanking the person for their contribution and so on. That is I think a somewhat different set of thinking for a traditional reporter, right? To sort of maintain this ongoing relationship. Places where I think that's been really helpful for reporters, and they've sort of seen the light, where they have created out of some of these reporting projects, private Facebook groups with sort of the hundreds of people who have sort of continued to be part of their sort of like line of reporting, and they can continually sort of draw from them in this pretty closed space, and have those people sort of talk to each other as well. And the instances where that's happened, the reporters have been delighted about this, right? So I think it's not just a sort of like, thank you, we'll never talk to you again sort of thing. If there are ways to keep the conversation going, I think that we've seen a lot of success with that.
Just my 2 cents. We didn't raise the expectations too much. The project started as a quantitative and qualitative crowdsourcing project. So all the people who participated to our survey, basically their data was used to give the big picture, and we aggregated all the quantitative data together and visualized it. So everybody was really taking part also in the second part of the co-publication process when we published the results. When we chose the 8 migrants living in Germany, we didn't receive any complaint from the others who weren't contacted. Actually, the email address was optional, so only the people who left it could be contacted again. But those who left the email address received also the updates of the project afterwards, so this probably let them feel part of an ongoing process and not just a one-off moment. We also created this Facebook group where people could take part and participate and share problems and discuss the results of the project, or also simply share their everyday lives as South European migrants. So we gave them some tools to feel part of the community, even after the final publications.
I would add my 2 cents in terms of the idea of the limited resources in journalism that's facing the industry right now. One question that I think that, in my observation, that isn't being asked enough is, after an interview with reporting, would be, who else should we talk to? The more you ask of who else we should talk to, you then quickly find the expertise in the community to be able to bring that value to the community again. So, again, because of the limited resources, it's always the first thing to go in terms of beat reporting. But finding that expert is a big core of what we need to do.
Thanks all for your insights. Since this is a tools panel, I hope I'll be allowed to ask a more technical question. We've done a lot of experiments with engagement over the last couple of years at my organization, which is a really small independent newsroom with just 8 people working at it. And one of the challenges that we've had when we're using different tools, we use GroundSource, we've used Twitter, we've used Google Forms for things, and more offline analog engagement techniques, is resources and capacity around maintaining engagement with those communities, but also sort of bringing them all together and moving the communities that we build around one piece of technology and one conversation over to others and across social media channels and those sorts of things. So this is sort of a question that I think there may be a technical answer to, but also it's a methodological question. So yeah, I'm curious what you guys think in terms of building those communities and maintaining it when you're working with multiple platforms and that.
Yeah, to the technical piece of it, we built an API with that very intent, and either to be able to publish in an RSS style feed and to plug it into your content management system so that you can start to flow all these things together. We're under no illusion that we'll be the only tool people will use to do these sorts of things. So we want it to integrate well. As well as with, I think more and more newsrooms are starting to think about using CRM tools, customer relationship management tools that were designed for salespeople, like Salesforce, but I think they're increasingly having utility for newsrooms to unify contacts. And I was just talking to someone about this last night. I think a lot of newsrooms have pockets of people of contacts and contact information spread all over the place. One little anecdote, at my previous company, I asked around that I had seen this little opt-in checkbox on a form saying, would you mind if we contacted you about future products and services? And I just was curious, like, where did all those contacts go? So I talked to the person who managed that, and he was like, yeah, we've got like 80,000 emails. I'm like, is there anyone doing anything with that? And he's like, no, you're the first person to ever ask about it. So I'm like, can I have those? And he gave them to me, and I had 80,000 people who I sent the message to the next week. And I think tens of thousands of them became part of the network we were building. So I think that's, if you're within an organization, start asking that, be a little forensic, and start asking those questions about your own organization. I guarantee you there's pockets of people who could be pulled into some community, but there does have to be a unified view of how you're communicating. I think CRM is one possibility, but there are others.
Yeah, I mean, short on technical solutions, but I think to Andrew's point, that's sort of what we're seeing, as well as the scope of the solution is really at the organizational level. So, with the traditional church-state divide, even in the past 6 months or so, I've like learned who the marketing people are, who are, in our case, like dealing with our CRM software. We use open source. We use Sugar CRM, and so particularly with that, there's no technical reason why our CRM can't tell someone in one of our call centers that the person on the other end of the phone is a meaningful contributor and sort of regular contributor to our site, and that they can't do something about that. I think back in this sort of connecting direction, if that's really sort of the center of it, and we have all these sort of spokes in different directions, so one way to think about it is, and this puts aside some of the more sensitive reporting stuff, but over time you can continue to build a more sophisticated profile of someone and then be able to sort of use that. I think we have to be very careful in tempering that, particularly from a privacy perspective, especially if we are sharing data essentially for journalistic purposes with business functions. And so I think it's the policy layer really for us, for an organization of our size, on top of the technology layer that we've really got to sort out before we step into that. Because I'm right now uncomfortable just like handing over a bunch of source material in any way, even accidentally having them end up getting like a 99 cents for 12 weeks kind of promotion offer.
All right. Well, thank you for the conversation and the questions and the presentation, everyone. And we'll see you around the festival. Thank you.
Thanks.